All right, it's time to start this talk. My name is Anna, and what you're going to listen to now is saying that which is hard to say, the nuts and bolts of political game narratives. So kind of what I'm going to touch upon in this talk is politics. What is politics? Like, this conference is about politics and games. What is that really? So especially in games, like how does that look like? What are we talking about when we mean politics and games? I'm going to talk a little bit about like how to approach your subject. If you decided you want to make politically charged games, like how do you approach that subject that you choose? Also, I'm going to talk a little bit about like tools for actually creating your narrative if it's political. I'm going to touch briefly on reception as well, but if you want a deeper analysis on that, Laura, my colleague here, is much better at talking about that than I am. So, who am I? My name is Anna Jenelius. I am the CEO and the creative director of Valiant Game Studio. We started just last year. Before that, I was a solo indie, so I made games with Talecore Studios. Like, I was just one person, but I still call myself a studio. So already then I made games that kind of had some kind of heavier subject to it. I was a game design teacher for a while at Future Games up in Stockholm. I was a freelance writer for Lionbite in Stockholm. Been at Paradox, both interactive and Paradox development studio. That's how I started my career in the games industry. I also host a row of like meetups in Stockholm called Linkin Park and Linkin Bar, along with a guy called Liam O'Neill. So that's a little bit of the background. And this is the game that we are working on right now with Valiant. It's called Pendula Swing. It's set in a fantasy version of the American Roaring '20s. And we use this game to talk about prejudice, racism, and other topics that are very like important in our society and that we talk a lot about in our society today. So I'm going to come back to this game and like talk about how we do it at Valiant through examples of like how we have done it in the development of this particular title. But like I said, first off, like what is politics? When I say politics, what do I even mean by that phrase, like by that word? So like when you hear politics, this might be what pops into your head, like, I don't know, the European Union, like the Parliament, the, I don't know, Senate maybe, or something like that. It's politicians, they talk, they make decisions you don't really understand, it's kind of far away. But you might also think like it's actual voting. It's like it's your actual vote as a person. Like you go somewhere, you say like you say who you want to be in power, and that's also politics, of course. And this might be like what immediately comes to mind, but it's so much more as well. It can be like whistleblowers, like Edward Snowden here. It's like, I know that something is wrong, and I need to tell people. Or it could be just standing up for what you believe in, even if that's putting yourself at risk. It can be, I don't know, going on strikes or joining unions and standing up for yourself in the workplace. That's also political in another way. Or it can be simply like joining people in your community and like, I don't know, sweeping the street outside of where you live. Like it can be very close and very personal as well, like with the group of people that you meet every day. It can be in school, like if you have an election or what it might be. All of this is politics and so much more. And when we zoom into games, of course it can also be so much. But when I say politics in games, I'm referring to, for example, if you're making a city builder, like the way that you like weigh things, like the way you balance, for example, in this case from City Skylines, the way you balance like your energy sources, like how much they cost and how dirty the dirty versions are and so on, that's political as well. So for example, in City Skylines, if I remember correctly, it's very, very beneficial to have wind-powered electricity. And some people might not agree that it's actually the best choice, but they, in this case, chose to put that as like that as the best option that we have. It can also be like this game, I don't know if you know about it. There's a game called America's Army, which is actually made by the US Army, and it's made to promote the US Army. It's a multiplayer game, a shooter. No matter which side you play on, you always play as American soldiers fighting other soldiers in another country. So it's made to portray their army in a positive light. On the other side of that specific spectrum, we have a game like Broforce, in which you play like an American soldier-ish, and you go to other countries and liberate them. It's like just a fun party game, but they use it to say like, it's very critical of like the way America liberates countries across the globe. But it can also be something very different, like, for example, if you want to call it gender politics or similar, so like having LGBT characters in your game can be viewed as political as well, even if some might argue it's just like actually showing people the way they are in society. But it's charged, and that's why, like, for most people, it's seen as a political act to put LGBT people in your game. And I would like to argue that even if you go out of your way to make a non-political game, to not put political context in your game, that is also political. Like, it's like not voting, for example. That is also political, because like you're still engaging or choosing not to engage with the political system. So to not put any political context into your game, any political like assets or anything into your game, that is also political, because like it is an act that you are doing. And I would like to argue also as well that it is a privilege to opt out of political content, because there are so many people in this world like who just like aching for a chance to talk to people, aching to find a way to like find their voice and to tell their side of the story, but they can't because they don't have that voice. So if you have a voice and make games and can reach people, if you have that and choose not to use it for anything, that is also political. And when I say privilege, it's kind of those words that's very like, I don't know, almost misunderstood right now. What I mean when I say that is the actual literal definition of it, which is an advantage only one person or group of people has, usually because of their position or because they are rich. So some people think that they can do this, but some people feel like if they're making games, they have to be say something, so to speak, with their games. So the big question is, should games even be political? Like some might argue, like games are just fun. Why does it have to be political? Why does it have to be so heavy all the time? Personally, my short answer is yes, games should be political. They are, and they should be. We shouldn't try to fight that. If you want my long answer, I have another talk about that. You can watch afterwards a whole talk about this topic. But let's then talk about like how, which ways can games then be political? If we look at some examples here, I would like to put them on a scale from implicit to explicit political content. So on the more explicit side, what I mean by that is like games that are, they are about politics. You can find games such as Democracy, shown here, and also Orwell. Like, there is no doubt about what they want to tell you. Like, democracy is literally about like making legislations and like making decisions that affect people's everyday life, and you try to balance that. So like, most people are happy. You're never gonna, completely succeed, but that is the point of the game. In Orwell, you are playing as like a government surveillance agent. So you survey people who are like viewed to be, they could be like terrorists or something. And what you do is you go through private conversations, private phone calls, and so on to try to like map up this this group of people, which of course is very, very topical today and a hot topic in society, and therefore like it taps into an ongoing conversation that we have. On the more implicit side, on the other hand, that's kind of games that could be political. If you really look for it, you could find some commentary that could be accidental or, put there for a reason. That's where I want to put like Sonic, for example, Sonic the Hedgehog. You could say it's about like, this deforestation, about like the environment, but it's not really about that. It's kind of in the background, maybe, if you look for it. Or a game like Tetris. I mean, if you think about it, you're building a wall in front of Soviet buildings, and this game was made like 2 years, I think, after the fall of the Berlin Wall in the Soviet Union. So it's like, if you know the context of the game, you could say it's probably-ish, could be a thought there, but it's mostly just a game. Back on the more explicit side, I like to put games such as like Papers, Please and This War of Mine, which I hope everyone here has played. But they have a very clear like message to you. But the reason why I don't put them all the way to the right here is because like you don't really come away like, I want to change something in my society today. Like it's hard to join an existing conversation. So in the top one here, Papers, Please, you play as a border guard in a totalitarian state. And like you can clearly tell that this is it's a harrowing game, and you see the point they're trying to make, but I don't know what to do with that information, really. And kind of same with This War of Mine. War is very, very bad, and this is a very, very harrowing game, but I don't really know what to do with that information. So that's why I'm putting it a little bit more on the left side. It's not joining a conversation that is really ongoing in the same way. And back to the more implicit side, I like to put games such as Tropico on top here, in which you play like a leader in a kind of tropical island. You can choose like have more, I don't know, tourism or go more like industry. These are political like decisions they have to make, but it's almost like the background, the scenery for the game rather than the actual main focus. Also, like in the Half-Life series, there is absolutely totalitarian states, but it's also more like, you know, it's a setting for the rest of the content of the game. Like the gameplay could have been somewhere else, theoretically. Our own game, Pendulum Swing, I like to place maybe somewhere here. There is definitely a lot of political content, but it's kind of lighthearted in the same way. It's not like in your face, very, very, well, like, it depends on how you look at it, but it's somewhere there on the scale, in my opinion. All right, so there's kind of a conundrum that we have as game makers when we try to make political content, which is that people need to, one, play your game. They want to approach your game and like feel like, okay, this is probably a game for me. They need to actually pick up on and understand your message. If they play your game and don't really get it and like get what you want trying to say, then the message is of course lost on them. And ideally, even if they disagree with you, they should still keep playing because they're like they should engage with more of your content so that you are more likely to maybe sway them to your side. And this is hard. And one way that I like to point out that you can do this, there are plenty of others, and this is really hard to like pinpoint exactly how to do it. But one way to do it is what I like to call like Trojan horse narrative, which is a game that on the surface looks like any other game, like exciting new game in this genre. But when you actually play it, you realize that it's actually something else. The best example of this I have is Spec Ops: Line. I don't want to spoil it too much, but it looks like any other shooter, but when you actually play it, you realize that it's not like any other shooter, and it's actually talking about the backsides of war to exactly people who play games about war, which is, I think, really good. They really, really hit their target audience with that. All right, so in practice, how do we actually do this? That was a little bit of the background, why we should do it and how, like what the context is. So how in practice, how do we do this? So first thing you need to do if you want to make a politically charged game is like trying to think of like what is making you tick, like what's the thing that keeps you up at night. It's like what makes you angry and like what makes you want to change the world, basically. I think we all have those like, I don't know, questions really burn in our brain sometimes. Like, or what are the most pressing issues in society today? Like, what are people talking about? So like, there are so many focus areas that you could possibly focus on. These are just some examples. Maybe it's like, I don't know, climate change acts, or prejudice, or fake news, or I don't know. There are so many things that you can like, this thing is what I hate, or like this really concerns me. Like how can we talk about this? Because if you feel like I'm boiling over, like I need to vent this specific thing, I'm sure there are other people who feel the same thing. And it's okay to be biased. It's okay to really say what you think about this and like show your side of the story. That's actually kind of the point. So if someone doesn't agree with you, maybe they should make another game and kind of answer you, like your side of the story. So we can have kind of a debate in games. That would be really cool. And when you get that, like, okay, this is actually like what really drives me. This is what I want to talk about. You need to boil it down. Because like if you feel like, okay, I want to make a game about, I don't know, climate change, for example, that's a huge topic. And unless you're going to make like an enormous, I don't know, some simulation game, it's going to be really, really, really hard. So you probably need to focus on just a part of that. So like boil it down to like just one piece of information, like one idea in this like sea of things that, for example, climate change is, and like focus on that for your game. It's going to be so much easier for you. So one example to kind of prove, to show what I mean is, there's a game called Hair Na, which is a game jam game. It's about like you're an African-American woman walking through an airport and you're in a rush and people like try to touch your hair all the time, which is a thing that actually happens to a lot of black women. And you have to like just swap away their hands so you can get to your flight on time. So it's just like a fun, quirky game about something that's actually very important. Like it's about consent, like touching other people without asking. And especially for black women, this is a thing that is really, you know, important to them. So like it's a fun way to just focus on one thing that is very important to people and make a fun little game about it. And then it's good to find like a clear statement, like boil down your idea and then like put it into words. So like what is it, like what's the like idea that should be in the head of your player when they quit the game? So if it's an easy to remember short statement, that's easiest for you and for, in the end, the player. So for Pendulous Swing, for example, I personally have like 2 ideas that might sound conflicting, but I'll get to that. So the one of them is, at the end of the day, we're all the same. Like we might look differently, we might have different cultures, but at the end of the day, we're all the same. But also, we're all different, and that's fine. Might sound conflicting, but when you think about it, they kind of can coexist. Other examples could be like, surveillance is bad if you're making Orwell. Or maybe someone would take away like, oh, surveillance is really cool. I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't pet service dogs, or maybe you think that capitalism is the solution, or whatever it might be. An idea I also think is very interesting is like, if you want to make an omelette, you have to break a few eggs, for example. So like, what's the omelette? That's something you want to achieve. Okay, what are the eggs? That's something you're ready to sacrifice to get to this goal. So playing with ideas like that can be really interesting. So my point is like, what is the message you're trying to send the player in a very, very short sentence that you have clear for yourself when you are writing and when you're designing your narrative? So that's your guiding idea, and I'm going to come back to that through the presentation. This is something that you can just like write on Post-it and like put it on your monitor or the forehead of your colleague or whatever, so you can see it all the time. Like all the time when you're working on this game, you should see this and you should think about it like, okay, this is what we are actually doing here. And then you need to start doing your research. And I cannot stress this enough. This is so, so, so important. Because especially if you're talking about something that you might not be 100% already involved in, you need to figure everything out before you start, or while you're writing. So read a bunch of stuff, and I'm not talking about just Wikipedia. Like, actually read books on the subject, or research papers, or articles, or blogs, or Twitter. This is kind of a falling scale of like from very, very hard to digest possibly to very, very easy. And I think a mix of everything here is a good way to go. So don't just read Twitter, but don't just read books either, because books can be a few years, lagging and so on. So you might not really be topical if you just read books, but you shouldn't just read Twitter either, because that's not research, really, to be honest. And ask questions. Find people who know more about something than you do, and ask them questions. And then shut up. So it's not about you. If you go to someone and like, hi, what's your side of the story? Just take yourself out of the equation and listen to what they actually have to say. So listen is the key word. Do interviews with people. See different sides. So what I've done for other games previously is like actively like, okay, hi, I'm making a game about these things. Like, does anyone know anyone who knows about this? Can I like reach out? Like, I try to reach out to people, and had like interviews. Like sometimes over Skype or in person. Like, just listen to people, and it's so important. And if you do interviews rather than like read, you can actually ask questions and get like specifically the information that you're looking for. And like sometimes you can really tell like if someone just went to Wikipedia or if they're actually researched their topic properly. And then it's time to integrate with mechanics. So it's fun and all to just come up with an idea, but then you actually have to make the game. And this is, of course, a huge topic, which is very hard to cover in this talk. But first off, like, you kind of need to decide if your game is really narrative-driven or if it's mechanics-driven. Meaning, like, are you telling the story through, for example, dialogue, like in the Telltale games, or are you more like telling the story through what the player is doing more in a more mechanical way, like in Papers, Please, for example? So like in a more narrative-driven game, you might start with your guiding idea and then like, okay, how do we build mechanics that support this idea? On the other side, you might really already have your mechanics. If you're working with a team, they might already know what the game is gonna like feel like and like how you're gonna play it. And then you have to like, okay, how can we like point them-ish towards our idea? Like how do we make them marry each other? And it's a tough balance. And like I said, this is talk on its own. But really, like less is more, in my opinion. Like don't push too much like mechanics in there that don't make sense. If you really want to tell a story, like really want to convey a message, just don't distract the player with too much like, I don't know, min-maxing or balancing, because if that's not the point, that's not what they should be focusing on. So really like the thing you put a lot of time into, effort into, is probably also what the gamer is going to put a lot of time and effort into. So if you put a lot of time into like balancing spreadsheets, your players are probably going to do the same and miss the whole point of the game. And we need also to remember that we are making games. So if you're more narrative, like writer focused, remember that these are also games. So it shouldn't be too heavy on just the writing side either. So like I said, it's a balance. And the narrative and the mechanics really have to marry and kind of speak the same language. And we need to trust the player here. Because games are an interactive medium. I think we can all agree on that. And that is our strength. Like, if you watch a movie or a TV series, like, they have their own benefits and drawbacks. But what is unique to games is that it is interactive. And that allows us to allow the player to see the different sides of a story in a way that not really any other type of medium can allow you to, because they can actually like walk around and like maybe talk to the bad guys or whatever it might be. Also, to be the bad guy themselves. I think it's a really good idea to allow the player to play the way they want and actually do horrible things sometimes just to see what happens. And also I think it's good to allow your player to choose how much of the content they want to interact with. It might sound, it might, give you a bad gut feeling when it's like, yeah, but they're gonna miss all this nice writing that I did, or like they might miss content that cost us a lot of money. But what we do in Pendulum Swing is like, if you engage with some parts of the game, that kind of leads you to other things. Like if you're interested in this topic, you can learn more about it. But if you're not interested, you don't have to. So like some people might not be very interested in or very comfortable with some of the topics that we talk about, and that's fine. And they can engage with other parts of the narrative instead. But that, I mean, like in a dialogue, for example, you shouldn't have to go through this whole like narrative tree if they don't want to. Like there are ways to like circumvene certain parts of it, certain topics. But if they choose to be the bad guy, you should also give them consequences. What actually happens when you're rude to someone? Or like if you, I don't know, kill this person, maybe you should actually give them some consequences to make them kind of reflect on their own behavior. Allow them to do a lot of stuff, but also tell them when that doesn't really align with the way this world works. So I touched a little bit. So when I said like that it can connect with some parts of narrative that they want to connect with, I like to call that kind of the rabbit hole narrative. So what I mean is like, if you start engaging with one part of the story, they will feel like, okay, this is interesting, like this topic is interesting. And then they kind of, if they keep like poking at that, they get more of that. So how we do that is like, if a character tells you like, for example, my same-sex partner, yada, yada, yada. And some players might be like, okay, that's actually not something that I'm interested in talking about right now. And that's fine, and they can move on. But if the player is like, okay, that's interesting, and they start, asking questions, then they get more content. And if they continue doing that, maybe they get a quest line because like now this character trusts you enough to, ask you for a favor, for example. And that might lead to more content in the same vein. So like the further, like the more they poke at it, the further down the rabbit hole they can go. And I think that's one way to do it when some parts of your narrative can be kind of, I don't know, maybe controversial, but also uncomfortable for some people. Something you can also use is your world building as a tool. So when I say world building, I mean like everything, like how the world works in your game. And even if you play it today, here, right now, you're still showing a version of that, like the world as you see it, basically. First off, of course, you need to find out like what setting best supports your idea. Should it be today, here? Should it be a fantasy setting? Should it be, I don't know, steampunk? Like what works with your story, like your guiding idea? And to highlight that specific guiding idea you have, just strip away everything that does not align with that idea. Like all the background radiation, all the background noise, just skip that. So like you might have all of these like neat characters, like so funny to talk to, but they don't have anything to do with what you're trying to say, or like all of these mechanics that don't really align with that. Or I don't know, you talk about 5 different issues at the same time, but there's one that's really important. Maybe leave the other ones for now and take those in the future instead in another game. So just to give some examples of what I mean, like, do you want to make a game where religion is very prominent? Maybe you do, and like then absolutely go ahead. But if religion is not really, it doesn't really have anything to do with your guiding idea, then maybe create a world where they just don't have a specific worldview. Like they don't talk about that. So just cut that out of your world building. If like the situation for children is in a specific way, like maybe they have specific issues that are just related to kids, then show that. If that's not what you're trying to say, then you maybe don't even have kids in your game. If you have minority groups in your game, should it always be horrible for them, which is too often the case, or could they actually just be like any other character in the game? So like we too often default like, oh, this character is a minority, so now we also have to show how bad it is to be the specific minority. But like, yeah, but if you're not talking about, if you don't really explore that topic, you're just perpetuating like stereotypes around that minority. So maybe just cut that part out and just make them more aligned with everyone else in the game. So in our case, in Pendulum Swing, this is a game about racism, prejudice, and so on. So for example, so 1920s was an era of great social change and so on, and also a lot of challenges. That's why we chose our setting. And for example, such a thing as gender is not the point. We talk about racism, not sexism in this game. So we decided to it's relatively, equal. There's not a lot of sexism because that's not the point. We don't want to distract from what we're trying to say through, also adding other questions, other issues into the game. So we didn't want to divert attention, basically. Another thing that you can do to really highlight your idea is using tropes. And by tropes, I mean stereotypes, basically. So ways of telling a story that are often used by writers, for example. And first off, you need to be aware of which tropes are out there. What is a trope? Which tropes are mostly used, most commonly used? So when I say, for example, that sad LGBT story where someone dies, or the sexy lamp, or manic pixie dream girl, if you don't know what I'm talking about right now, it's good to actually research this and know how people often write stuff. And tropes are not inherently good or bad. They are just there. There are ways people usually there are things that pop up quite often in games and TV and movies. So first off, you just need to be aware of them. And sometimes it's really good to counteract tropes to make your story a little bit more engaging, a little bit more fresh and new. So think about stuff like, does your hero have to be, the generic white cis hetero dude, and for example, where in the world do your emerging cultures come from? So if you have this tribal culture, for example, where are you placing them on the map if you have a world map? Do they always have to come from the southeast or from the jungle? Can we mix it up a little bit? So it's not always this very white West European culture that's always the norm and everyone else is weird. Maybe we can mix that up a little bit more. Could the enemy be a political system rather than just one person, maybe? Because so often we tell stories where there is this one bad guy and then you shoot him and everything is fine. That does not work. That's not how our world is built, and I think it's actually dangerous to keep perpetuating that idea. I think something that can be, in some cases, even more effective is to leverage tropes that exist to, make a point. So, for example, if you choose to have a white cis hetero dude as your main character, maybe he can use that to infiltrate, the corridors of power and then, take over the world for good or something. Or show what that happily ever after that we always hear about, what that actually looks like. Does your character get PTSD? Or what happens afterwards? We're so used to that. And then they lived happily ever after. But what does that actually mean? Or in our case, so for example, goblins. Most of us know what a goblin is. It's kind of a trope. It's a character type that's commonly used in fantasy. So that's kind of one of the tropes that we started with. They're low-level, stupid enemies. But are they, though? So in our world, they are just as intelligent as humans or elves, but they have a shorter lifespan, which just makes their culture different. And for a long time, they have been at war with humans and elves and so on. But now they aren't anymore. Now you can actually get to know them and see, oh, right, you are actually smart, and I killed a bunch of you, and that was maybe not so good. So we're using a trope to kind of turn things on their head. And since most players have the same trope, or the same idea about goblins as the main character does, it actually works out pretty nicely. We have a similar thing for the orcs in the game. Most of us think orcs are brutal and unsophisticated. Think Tolkien, they're not the smartest and they're kind of gross. But actually in our world, they care deeply about education, for example. It's very ingrained in their culture, but they see the world in a very different way than, for example, humans, because humans used to kill them and then they wrote history books about it. So when orcs go to school and they learn that, it's that's not really what happened. So it's a really a nice tool to to like turn things on their head and make a point, because this is also something that happens in our world as we speak today. That people like, yeah, that history thing that you teach in school, that's not at all what's going on, especially for minorities and indigenous people and so on. Next thing, moving on, I want to talk about is to use contrasts when you write your narrative. So if you want to show something as really, really bad and really, really dark, it's like the most effective way of doing that is to also show some light. It's easy to just like, everything sucks and that's your game. Like, this is bad because look how bad it is. But if you want to make it truly effective, add some light to it as well. Like, also have some flickers of like, this thing is amazing, and put that in contrast to what is kind of bad. Which sounds very weird when I say it. So I'm going to use another example, which is not a game. It's a movie called Grave of the Fireflies. If you have seen this, you probably see a tear falling from your eye right now. This is a horrifying movie about two kids in Japan during World War II. And it's especially harrowing because some parts are really nice and they actually have a good time and they're laughing, and then everything turns bad again, and it's just, because some movies just are bad all the way through. It's like, yeah, that's horrible. But like, you don't really connect with characters because you never see them happy. You see these kids happy sometimes, and that's what makes it so hard when it's, when they have a bad time. So that's what I'm saying, like, have some dark parts if you need it or if you want it, but also have some light in there as well. And every design decision matters. So when I said like marry your narrative and your mechanics, like you should always, like all through your development, keep your guiding idea in mind. And every time you write a piece of dialogue or introduce a new mechanic or whatever it might be, is that actually in line with the idea that we have or with the content that we already have? If you start like, okay, this is the idea, this is where we're going, and then like, oh, this would be a cool mechanic, and that tells the player something else, that's not going to help you. So like I said, like have that guiding idea in front of you all the time and make sure that as you go along, always align everything to that. All right, so now you made your game and you wanna, you got it out on the market in front of people. Then what? Like I said, Laura is really the expert in this, and she had to talk about this on Wednesday. But there's something like right now, you feel a little bit damned if you do, damned if you don't, when it comes to political narratives sometimes, especially when you talk about, social issues when it comes to, I don't know, gender and so on. Because for quite a few years, people have been saying, like, if you don't like what's out in the market, then go make your own games. That's been like the story we've been told for, like, well, if you don't like it, make it your own. Like, don't just complain. And then we did, and now they say, like, yeah, it's social justice warrior propaganda. This is one of the comments that we got on our game. But really, there's no way to... like, we just have to keep going, have to keep making these games. Like, there's no way to win with some of these people. So just like, just ignore this and just keep going forward. And something that we like to say at Valiant is like, for every hater, there are at least one lover. There are two lovers. So like, this is from our first trailer. First, someone was like, oh, it could have been a nice piece of indie game, but then, it's just propaganda and social justice trash. And people started defending us. People we never met started jumping into the comments like, well, if you don't like, I'm going to buy this game now. I wasn't even planning on doing it, but now I'm going to buy this. And most people won't even go as far as commenting. They will see that comment like, that person is an idiot, and I like this game even more now. It's actually a thing that happens. So even if it can be hard to take the criticism and it can be even scary, there are also people who will stand up for you. So I hope you can like find, I don't know, some solace in that. There are people ready to defend you as well. And I hope that will be your experience too. But the most important part, I would like to say, after you actually have released your game and get in front of people, is to actually listen to your audience. Especially if this was a heavy game, it had some loaded content in it, and people engaged with that, like listen to what was their actual experience with your game. So what did they like? What could have been better? And sometimes it can be easy to like, when people, for example, I don't know, write on Steam like, oh, this was bad, and I don't know, to see it as like a personal attack, but try not to do that. They are commenting on your content that has really nothing to do with you. All you can do is like, okay, let's do it better next time, so we don't end up in this situation again. And help them help you. So create a space for them where they feel like they can share like their opinions in a safe way. So we have this like safe environment. What does that mean? But that, like, so for example, to make people feel like they can come to you with opinions, make sure that you greet people in a nice way. So like if people start commenting, for example, on your Steam page, respond to them and say, thank you so much for your input. Like, could you elaborate on this part, or it might be. People will see that, like, okay, these developers actually respond, that's nice. They are people, that's nice. Maybe I can there also type something. And try and have as open a dialogue as possible. We use Discord, for example, invite people in and talk to them like in an open way there. Try to be approachable, friendly, and if they take the low road, insult, or just like, yeah, you just see like the profanity filters taking over because they're trying to make you upset, take the high road. Don't go down to their level and insult them back. Just like, I'm sorry you feel that way. There are plenty of other games if you don't like this one, but if you care to elaborate, like which parts didn't you like? What could have been better, you know? And sometimes people will actually be nice in their second comment if you actually take them seriously and ask them for more, more input. Then we say, oh yeah, there was actually a person there on the other side. Okay, yeah, this is my actual input. That's happened to me. So if you take the high road, you can sometimes expect to actually get a more adult answer the second time. And consider your choice of channels. Is, for example, Steam where you want to engage with your players? Do you want to use Discord, Facebook, Twitter? There are so many channels where you can talk to your players. What works for you as developers? Where can you greet people? Where can you listen to them and take them seriously? And I think it's good to consider that. This is more kind of marketing or PR, but you can also use this as feedback for your game development process. So try and find a way that your audience can help you. So in summary, everything in our world is political. Games are too, and they should be. Even more games should be like actually trying to be political, in my opinion. So try and find your guiding idea. What makes it tick? What in the world could be better? Build your mechanics to support it, or if you already have mechanics, like how can you make them point towards your idea in some way? Use world building and tropes to your favor. Use whatever tools you have to like leverage them to point towards your idea. Prepare to be questioned while once you have released your game, but listen to that feedback, listen to the audience, and try to learn from them. And you are important. Let's go kick some butt. That's my talk. Thank you. I think we have some time for questions. So if you have any, I'm happy to answer them. No questions? One question, come on. No questions. All right, thank you.